Hello, everybody. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy and Future. Today, my guest is Gustav Gressel, a security expert dealing with security issues in Europe and the world. Hello, Gustav. How are you?
Good morning.
We had pleasure before. We discussed, the security issues of Poland, Germany, Polish-German relationship, NATO, many issues. But the moment we are talking now, and we are recording this conversation on 25th of January 2022, is very special. Actually, we are in the midst of the crisis around Ukraine, related to the show of force by Russia and the maybe pending war. And the question is, Gustav, is the war inevitable? What is your assessment of the situation in that respect?
Well, the war is not inevitable, but it's very likely. So the military preparations that Russia has enacted are quite serious. There has been sort of a long rehearsal to what is going on now. It's underpinned by demands towards Europe, towards Ukraine. We see quite a serious preparation. So it's not only tanks that are transported there for show. There's the force posture that each of the combat groups they're assembling from sort of different parts of Russia. They are sort of assembled according to a tangible operative task. We see a lot of live ammunition shipped around. We see fuel shipped around. We see really logistical preparations as well. We see the Navy now going into preparations. Probably in Belarus, the Air Force and Air Force exercises are already announced. I would guess that increased Air Force activity will come over the next weeks. One crucial thing that I still miss is a bit sort of internal security forces, National Guard, specialized forces to repress unconventional resistance. This might also come or be added in the upcoming weeks, or what also would fit the picture, actually, that sort of the Russians, believing their own political correctness, underestimate the risk of civilian non-linear resistance in Ukraine. But otherwise, sort of the military preparation is in place, and we'll see what Putin decides.
Mm-hmm. So what will be, in your opinion, the final indication that the war is imminent? What sort of observation would be crucial for us to understand?
I don't think that sort of the war will start like 1939 against Poland, that there will be sort of a morning of one short false flag attack and then sort of it's all rushed to total war. I guess, and this is a guess, this is not I know, but this is sort of my educated guess, and I might be horribly wrong on that. It's just what I think, is that the Russians will gradually escalate for two things that they want to probe. The first thing is they want to probe whether the West is serious about sanctions and countermeasures and how far they might go. The second thing they want to probe is sort of whether the Ukrainians would crumble under military threat and a limited military action and submit to their demands, and whether they have to really occupy the whole country. What I see on the Russian side, and this is something I see continuously and on a constant pattern since years, is that they completely mistake the domestic developments in Ukraine and the political situation in currents in Ukrainian society. They have their own myth that sort of it's a brotherly nation, and that sort of the country is divided between Russian speakers and Ukrainians, and there are a few Ukrainian nationalists who would really fight for independence, and there's sort of a large part of indifferent people, and there are our boys, the Russians, who we need to protect and who want to be with Russia, and they perceive the current government as a puppet of the West and not something genuinely Ukrainian, and they think that sort of the Western puppet regime will crumble once you push, and that is sort of one misestimation. I think they are going sort of they might just, or very likely will try to increase military pressure short of what the West would fully sanction, but in their mind severe enough that Ukraine they think might capitulate. try that first. And once they recognize that Ukraine won't, because they have completely misunderstood Ukrainian domestic politics, they will come to the conclusion that that sort of they will have to sort out governmental issues in Kiev by themselves, which means, of course, going to Kiev by tank. So what we have to watch out is all sorts of accusations, provocations, every kind of sort of creating a pretext. But once the Russians break off negotiations and ramp off the propaganda war and say, the West has insulted us and they will not come to terms and we are threatened, we need to take action, because that is sort of preparing their population and preparing the propaganda war for a larger military involvement of Russia, whatever form it then may take.
Mm-hmm. So what is your then opinion about that? What is the grand strategy objective of Russia?
Well,
but why are they doing it all together?
Why are they doing it all together? That, of course, has a lot to do with how Putin sees the world and how Putin sees the world changing and how he perceives Russia itself. So Putin sees the West in decline. The Europeans are decadent and unwilling to defend themselves, and it's only up to the Americans to keep Europe alive. And the Americans are preoccupied about China. China is rising rapidly. China is also, due to the pandemic, made a very stark turn towards a more confrontative countries. So it will keep the Americans busy. And the more the Americans want to leave Europe and have domestic squabbles, the better for Russia. And this will open up opportunities for Russia to apply military pressure and to reestablish predominance over vast parts of Europe. They perceive the current situation, COVID-19, the disarrays in the way, that the domestic squabbles in Washington, as such an opportunity. But they might, they hope that there are other opportunities. The second thing is they think that only empires can survive in history. Normal states, are a playing ball of world history and are a playing ball of external powers. But empires persist and empires last. So Russia needs to be an empire, not only in terms of size and geography, but also in terms of population and industrial power and sort of intellectual, innovative power. For that, it needs to have an empire. It has to rule over lands that are more densely populated than Siberia and sort of that augment the Russian power over time, which is Russian hegemony over Eastern Europe, at least. Ukraine being at the core. If you can't get Ukraine, you're not an empire. But as you saw in the demands of December 17th, they really want domination over Eastern Europe, at least. And that is sort of what's the long-term goal. And Ukraine is the first step. And from there, they think that opportunities will present themselves along the way to regain this kind of glory and greatness.
So first of all, do you think that they will succeed in this grand strategy? And that's number one. And the number two is, do you think that their ultimate goal is to convince the continental Europeans, without US, with the US gone, that we need to build one common space of prosperity between Vladivostok and Lisbon, and with Germans and French, all together, and the Russians, playing the hardball game against other Eurasian, empires and countries on behalf of Europe? Is this the Russia's ultimate goal, to position itself in this new world order? What is your take on
that? So whether we will be able to prevent that depends on to us. When I look at Western Europe, I'm slightly pessimistic. When I look at Eastern Europe, I am more optimistic. But yes, this is sort of the Russian ultimate goal, to push the Americans out of the European continent and then to dictate the terms of coexistence on the rest, and to make the rest of Europe subservient to greater Russian interests. That is the whole Lisbon to Vladivostok talk. This is the whole issue of new European security order. It has recurred over the past 30 years in different wordings, in different settings, in different plans. Of course, the more Russian power increases, compared to European ones, the less such Russian grand designs reflect any or are willing to reflect any other interest but theirs. So also the Kremlin itself and Russia itself in its sort of domestic policies has changed to the worse since. So this attempts for a new European order become increasingly colonial, but they always were a quasi-colonial projects. And I mean, frankly, it's nothing new. I mean, the Russians have been telling us this since decades. It's just nobody listened and took it seriously.
Okay, so as far as I remember, you are based in Berlin, right? Am I right? No?
Yes.
Okay, so what is the German debate about everything that we have just said over this 15 minutes?
The German debate on this is non-existent. There are very few German experts who recognize that the Russian debate is that way and Russian goals are that way. Actually, the print media, or parts of the print media, have recognized this and the severeness and discuss it. But this is a discussion amongst sort of the top 5% of the country. If you look at the TV screens, and both public and private, you see kind of Putin versteher, you see the narratives that we have insulted Russia, that the eastern expansion was a mistake, that Ukraine needs to compromise with Russia on Donbass, and all this kind of blah blah. It is a very crazy situation right now, and if you want to lose faith in humankind, you better you can watch German TV, and you will do so in 5 minutes.
Nicely put. Very interesting. So, what do you think about the interests of the German industry and the vested interests that drive the German foreign policy? Why are the Germans sitting on the fence? Why are the Germans sitting on the fence?
I don't think that industrial interests drive German policies. I mean, there are constituencies in German society that actively hope for Russian liberation from Americanism, etc. But also these are a minority. I mean, large parts of the Germans just don't grasp what is going on. And there are some industrialists and there are some politicians who belong to this kind of revanchist elite, but they are not the majority and they're not driving foreign policy right now. The problem on German foreign policy is that they have completely lost the public perception. It was very tricky I mean, Scholz is cleverer than most of his party. He knows roughly what's at stake. He has no illusions towards the Russians, but he knows that in his party there is no real mandate to do something about it, and that he has to, because the public mood is kind of want Germany to be a giant Switzerland, keep out of everything and keep neutral to everybody. And that is unviable if you are Germany in the situation you are now. So he's trying to kind of coordinate the response with the Americans while putting himself at minimum exposure to domestic policy discussions, because he perceives domestic discussions are only a risk for whatever you're trying to do in foreign policy. He's 100% Merkel on that. Never discuss it with the public. The problem is that the public perception that is then shaped through crazy discussions, through admirals that talk complete nonsense in some Indian think tanks, through some former politicians, former chancellors that give their nonsense, is that Germany is totally unreliable and is an ally of Russia, which is not that much true. I mean, we had last week the decision that Nord Stream 2 will be put on a table of sanctions. We are deeply coordinating the sanctions issue with the Americans. The Germans are willing and are already sort of consulting with those countries who are very skeptical of sanctions to really box them in, not to foil a common decision in the EU once the Russian invade. So, but the thing is that is not discussed in public, and that is not part of the public discussion. The discussion is about the crazy discussion of German guilt towards Russia, and Mr. Kuyat and other people trying to re-narrate Russian myth. this is the problem we have now in Germany, and I think the perception that Germany is unreliable has stuck, and it will haunt Germany in the coming years, if not decade. Because if I see where we have lost the common ground and where we've lost the debate, these are all those states that are usually the allies of Germany when it comes especially to fiscal policies, to how the EU should be organized, competences of Brussels, etc. All the administrative things. And here, the Scandinavian states, the Eastern European states, all these who are more market economy oriented, more competitive, more kind of subsidiary thinking in terms of the subsidiarity principle. All these states are more critical on Russia and more outspoken and willing to militarily do something about it. And all them Germany has angered deeply, and who has sort of destroyed the trust by this kind of silent policy and silence
I can tell you what it looks like from Warsaw. There is a big question mark regarding the cohesion of NATO due to the German behavior, and that I think undermines the European project. That might be a nice lesson for the Germans to listen, for two reasons. First of all, is that there is a growing understanding in Warsaw and elsewhere in the region that even with the federalization of the European project, the Russians will be negotiating the political framework by forced negotiations using the new generation warfare. And since the Germans or French cannot project power to Eastern NATO flank and are not ready to engage, to sort of face the challenge because they don't have the military that is adequate to stand up to the Russians. So without the US, it doesn't make sense. I mean, federalization will not make sense for Eastern Europeans because their security needs will not be worked on, and the Russians will exploit it. So, in this sense, the military weakness of Germany is playing against this desire that the new government has signaled to build a united Europe, federal Europe.
Yes, but I mean, from the German view, sort of America has to stay in the European security architecture because for that very reason, the Germans were, unlike the French, never had an illusion that security in Eastern Europe could be handled without the Americans. But I mean, even there, when the thing is that even the expectation, for example, of the British that flying over Germany would be a bureaucratic fuss, and that they didn't ask for permission to fly over Germany, they just flew around it because they thought it's just easier to organize that, says a lot about the current mood, what people think about Berlin. The discussion about re-exporting ex-German Democratic Republic howitzers, etc., to Germany. I mean, to be honest, the Germans haven't decided to block that decision. They're just investigating it via the usual bureaucratic means of clearing exports, which, if you know German bureaucracy, is mind-blowing. Everybody who comes from the developed world and who's used to a functioning state administration, so not Germans and particularly not Berlin-based Germans, thinks this is sabotage. But if you know the German bureaucracy, you know that actually this is the usual. But nobody understands that who doesn't know the German context. And they lost the narrative about that. The same thing is with sort of Baerbock. If she in Kiev, if she said, look, I don't have the federal government does not have a domestic mandate to give you weapons, but the Americans have, and the British have, and other Europeans have, and we respect the decision. The German part in all of this is coordinating sanctions on the economic field and especially in the energy market. And on this, it was a hard fight. And if we start to discuss weapons delivery now, we lose the consensus we have hard fought for on energy issues and Nord Stream 2. So please consider this discussion as closed in Germany and talk to those powers who have a mandate. Everybody would have understood that. Everything would have been clear. There would have been no further decision and discussion in Berlin needed. And there would be no shit story. But if you start with history and historic guilt in the country that after the Belarusians has suffered the most from Nazi occupation, if you take percentage-wise in people killed, I mean,
of course, it doesn't make sense. Poland shouldn't.
It's a complete insult, you know. This is
Poland shouldn't. I'm not talking about us. I'm going forward to the future. Since the Germans simply want to build a federal Europe, so they need to provide the means for that. Actually, right? They want to have their toy, so they pay for it. So that's basically it.
The federal Europe is more a pipe dream. I mean, I think there is much more sort of fruitless discussion based around it, because the Germans don't have even sort of minor treaty changes from the current treaty are not sort of negotiated or envisioned. Merkel was one of the most sort of council-centric chancellors we had in German history. I mean, every chancellor before her had more trust in the EU Commission than Merkel. She was the most Gaullist chancellor, and all decisions in sort of amending the European economic and financial order, that new instruments to deal with the debt crisis and with the banking crisis were all sidelining the Commission. So you know, I mean, the Germans talk federal Europe, but actually, if you see their action, it's completely the other way around. So I would not waste too much time on discussing this. It's more something that is put up for the public and for visionaries.
That's fair enough. But that's fair enough. So what it means, what the crisis around Ukraine and the apparent Russian grand strategy of flexing the muscle, what it means for Europe.
Well,
let's put aside the United States. What it means for Europe and the European Union.
The problem is you can't put aside the United States, and the problem here is that a lot of people in Europe, including Germany, are underestimating the problems that the current administration has in kind of advocating a larger role in Ukraine. I mean, the current administration is one of the last sort of traditional American administrations, were sort of the tradition of being a quasi-European power by sort of being deeply embedded in European security affairs is sort of pictured. If you see the CVs of the persons involved, you know, they have all had their tenures in Europe and they know the European counterparts, etc. But if you watch Tucker Carlson, and if you particularly see the opinions on the right-wing spectrum, not the old sort of traditional left-wing pacifist people, they're sidelined. But the biggest problematic constituency now is the kind of post-traditional Trumpian Republicans, not the Romneys and Cheneys, but sort of the hardcore Fox News crowd and those who deny January 6th, etc. For them, Europe is a distraction, and the Europeans and the NATO alliance is nothing but a bunch of beggars who drain American resources for no reason. And these people are far more popular than any of these kind of isolationist groups had been since the Second World War. If you give them the ratings and the popularity of Biden right now, with all these big domestic projects having failed, it would not be a surprise if they would dominate the legislative, or at least have a significant swath in the legislatives after the midterm election, and pose a serious threat in the next presidential race. And given all what we see now, how the French and the Germans behave and how they're fence-sitting, without the Americans, we all screwed. And everybody knows that. But the problem is the Americans are far from being as predictable as they used to be. And we are not really factoring in how quick the domestic debate in the US might change for much worse. I mean, even Trump, you know, the last Trump administration, we had the president who had sometimes some strange views about Russia. But if you look at his Ministry of Defense, at his national security advisors, during a long part of the history, they have been really keeping things together. They were from the old style Republican traditional conservative group that was not going to give up to Russia. Now, this populist movement around Trump, they were a minority in their own administration back then, but they have increased in numbers. They have new figures. They have new figures in the media. They start to sort of grow their own intellectual environment, where they have quasi think tanks, where they have people who are more acquainted with the practical side of administrating and governance as such as Trump as a one-person sort of campaign team. So in the next Republican administration, if led by such a populist Republican, we cannot trust on our old established Republican allies to kind of keep the president away from doing really stupid things, including from leaving NATO if it really comes to that. And that is what is deeply worrying me, because we, especially here in Berlin, people have absolutely no idea and absolutely no clue and absolutely no mandate to handle a situation like that.
Yeah. So, what do you think? What happens in this context to NATO and the Western world if Russians invade? Will the Americans deploy troops to Poland and other countries? Will the border between Poland and Belarus and between Poland and Ukraine become a new wall of the Western world and Eurasian revisionist powers? What do you think? What will happen to all of us?
Well, that to be honest, if Russia invades Ukraine, actually this would be the least harmful scenario in all of that, because I mean, as I said in the beginning, the Russians are severely misestimating Ukrainian domestic policies. They have the wrong picture of Ukrainian society. They underestimate the resolve of the general population to resist the occupier, to not accept a Russian occupation regime. The Ukrainians will fight. So when the Russians go there, when they deploy their forces, and then it's sort of a brotherly war against Slavs, and there are more casualties as they think, and they continue to have casualties, and they continue to be resistant. They will deploy large number of National Guards. They will deploy special forces. They will deploy large numbers of FSB. They will erect a occupation regime. They will handle dissent in the harsh and brutal manner they do in Belarus and they do in the DNR-LNR, which means running concentration camps, running torture centers like Izolatia. And it will not be a small affair. Terrorizing the Ukrainian people into submission is something that will involve security personnel in the hundreds of thousands. And all these people will be radicalized. They will be off-leashed. They will be involved in deepest crimes against humanity and civilians on the territory of Ukraine. They will clinch to power because they have to, otherwise they will be sent off to The Hague. They will do everything to stay in power. They will not show any regret because they can't. They will make the West responsible for whatever happens because that's their only excuse in front of their own population for the giant policy failure that's in front of them. So they will use the military and military might to perceivingly compel us to give up Ukraine, because of course every Ukrainian that resists is an agent of the West in their mind. We will face not a silent wall that divides Europe. We will face a continuous scenario of escalation, pressuring nuclear and other threats against us to accept Russian rule over Ukraine, or to be the lightning rod for failed domestic policies there. The radicalization of the security apparatus will have deep and profound implications for Russia's domestic and foreign policy. And there will be no way for us to evade the consequences. This will come down on all of us, and there is no European who will be spared of that. The situation reminds me of the prediction of the former and then Latvian foreign minister who on March 13th, 1938 said Austria's refusal to resist in arms means war in Europe within 18 months. From March 1938 to September 1939, we had 18 months. We will be in a very similar Europe where the conquest of one increases the appetite and compelling reasons to go further. We should not treat this war as something that is happening to kind of strange, faraway Eastern Europeans who love to fight anyway. This is Europe at stake, and with everything going on in Washington, it couldn't come at a worse time. And if that prediction comes at the time of the inauguration of Tucker Carlson, I don't want to draw the picture what happens then, but it will be miserable.
Yeah, interesting times ahead of us. Thank you, Gustav. Our guest today was Gustav Gressel. I hope that you will accept our invitation for another session soon. The situation is very dynamic. Thank you very much. Jacek Bartosiak, you stay with us for more at Strategy and Future.